The darkness of the night had swallowed Shannon whole, a small, insignificant blip on its radar as she pulled into her driveway. The crunch of gravel beneath her tires was the only sound that broke the stillness, a lonely echo that would soon be replaced by an unsettling silence. She'd spent the day in Denver, away from the quiet routine of Frederick, and now she was home, exhausted but relieved to finally relax. As she stepped out of her car, the evening air clung to her like a damp shroud, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. The streetlights cast an eerie glow, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist across the pavement. Shannon's footsteps were slow and deliberate as she made her way to the front door, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of life. But there was none. The house was still, its windows like empty eyes staring back at her with an unsettling calm. She'd grown used to the peace, but tonight it felt oppressive, a reminder that even in this small town, dangers lurked just beyond the edge of perception. Shannon slipped inside, shedding her jacket and shoes as she went, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet the only sound that broke the silence. The kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the microwave clock. She yawned, the exhaustion catching up with her, and made her way to bed. The next morning, Shannon's alarm clock shattered the stillness, its shrill ring piercing the quiet like a scream. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes, feeling a twinge of unease as she remembered she had an appointment at the doctor's office later that day. A checkup for her pregnancy, a routine visit to ensure everything was progressing normally. But something was off. As she got dressed and prepared for her appointment, Shannon couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the lingering unease from the night before, it was a sense of foreboding that clung to her like a damp mist. She tried to push it aside, telling herself she was just being paranoid. She left for her appointment without incident, but as the day wore on and the hours ticked by with no sign of Shannon, a friend's concern turned to alarm. It wasn't like Shannon to miss an appointment, let alone not respond to calls or texts. The friend's unease grew, until finally she decided to take a chance and call the police. The officers arrived at the Watts home just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Chris Watts opened the door, his face calm, composed, rehearsed. He looked tired, but not worried. "Not yet." "Hey, can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. "We're here to do a welfare check on Shannon Watts," one of them said. "She didn't show up for her doctor's appointment today, and we've been trying to reach her all day." Chris Watts' expression didn't change, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise, a glimmer of confusion that was quickly extinguished by an air of studied calm. "I don't know where Shannon is," he said, his voice steady. "I haven't seen her since she left for work this morning." The officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the quiet home, searching for any sign of the missing woman and her 2 young daughters. But there was nothing. No signs of struggle or disturbance. Just an eerie silence that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. As they searched, Chris Watts hovered at the edge of the room, his presence seeming to grow more oppressive with each passing moment. His eyes darted from one officer to another, his face a mask of concern, but beneath it, something else lurked. Something dark and sinister that seemed to be watching them all, waiting for its chance to strike. And in that moment, the officers knew they were dealing with something far more sinister than just a missing person. They were staring into the abyss of a darkness that would soon consume everything in its path. Chris Watts, the suburban father of 2, seemed to have it all. A loving wife, beautiful children, a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. On social media, he presented a picture-perfect family, posting photos of his loved ones with saccharine captions that dripped with sincerity. His neighbors and co-workers described him as kind, dependable, and quiet, the embodiment of every middle American dream. But was this really who Chris Watts was? Or was this just another chapter in the grand novel of his dark psychology? You see, when you gaze upon a person like Chris Watts, you're not seeing the real him at all. You're seeing a carefully constructed mask, a false self designed to deceive and manipulate others. This is the narcissistic mask, the ultimate tool of the dark triad personalities that Chris Watts so masterfully employed. And it's not just about deception. This mask is also a source of narcissistic supply, a means by which he could feed his insatiable ego. When we think of narcissists, we often imagine grandiose individuals with inflated senses of self-importance. But Chris Watts was different. He didn't need to boast about his accomplishments or flaunt his possessions. Instead, he hid behind the veil of domesticity and family values. This mask allowed him to blend in seamlessly with the crowd, making it all but impossible for anyone to suspect the monster lurking beneath. The narcissistic mask is an incredible feat of self-control. Chris Watts could switch from one persona to another like a chameleon, changing colors. In private, he was free to unleash his true nature, calculating, ruthless, and devoid of empathy. But in public, he donned the guise of a devoted husband and father, all the while secretly manipulating those around him. As we delve deeper into Chris Watts' psyche, it becomes clear that this mask was not just a tool for deception, it was also a source of validation. The more people admired his perfect family, the more he felt seen and appreciated. This is what psychologists call narcissistic supply, the constant stream of admiration and validation that narcissists crave. But here's the thing, the narcissistic mask is always unsustainable in the long run. It's like a house built on quicksand. It may appear solid at first, but eventually, it will collapse under its own weight. And when Chris Watts' mask began to crumble, he found himself unable to maintain the charade any longer. You see, as much as Chris Watts needed his narcissistic supply, he also desperately needed control. The more people admired him, the more he felt in charge. But this need for control ultimately proved to be his downfall. His obsessive desire to manipulate and dominate those around him led him down a dark path of destruction, one that would eventually claim the lives of his wife and children. The mask may have been convincing at first, but it was always bound to fail. Chris Watts was trapped in a web of deceit, and there was no escape. As we continue to explore the depths of his psyche, we'll uncover the dark secrets he kept hidden behind that mask, secrets that would ultimately lead him down a path of darkness and despair. But for now, let's focus on the mask itself. The carefully constructed false self that Chris Watts used to deceive and manipulate others. It's a powerful tool in the hands of narcissists, allowing them to blend in seamlessly with their surroundings while secretly feeding their insatiable ego. And it's this very same mask that will eventually lead Chris Watts down the path of destruction. In the end, Chris Watts' story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of the narcissistic mask. It may seem convincing at first, but ultimately, it's a fragile facade built on quicksand, one that will inevitably collapse under its own weight. As we delve deeper into the psyche of Chris Watts, a complex tapestry of traits emerges, woven together by the threads of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Like a chameleon adapting to its surroundings, Watts's personality shifts to suit his needs, camouflaging his true nature beneath a veneer of charm and deceit. Narcissistic tendencies are evident in Watts's grandiose sense of self-importance. He craved attention and admiration, often seeking validation through social media and online interactions. His desire for a new life, free from the constraints of his mundane routine, was fueled by an inflated sense of entitlement. In his mind, he was worthy of a better existence, one that didn't involve the burdensome responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage. To Watts, his pregnant wife Shannon and their children were mere obstacles to achieving this new life. They represented the constraints he desperately sought to escape. His inability to see them as anything more than pesky impediments is a hallmark of narcissistic thinking. Others are mere props to serve one's own needs and desires. Psychopathy, often characterized by a lack of empathy and emotional depth, is equally evident in Watts's behavior. During police interviews, his responses were marked by a flat affect, a monotone delivery devoid of genuine emotion. He exhibited no signs of remorse or grief, even as the bodies of his loved ones lay mere feet away. This detachment was also apparent during Watts's interactions with Shannon's family and friends. He displayed an eerie calmness in the face of tragedy, as if he had disconnected himself from the emotional impact of his actions. This emotional numbing allowed him to continue living a double life, juggling his new affair with Nicole Kessinger while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband and father. Watts's Machiavellian tendencies were on full display through his calculated deception. He orchestrated a complex web of lies, weaving together a narrative that convinced everyone around him of his innocence. He manipulated Shannon into believing he was struggling to cope with the stress of being a new father, using her empathetic nature against her. Meanwhile, he secretly planned his escape, meticulously crafting an alibi and a cover story to deceive even those closest to him. The investigation revealed a trail of subtle manipulations, each designed to further Watts's own interests. He convinced Shannon that the baby was causing her stress and anxiety, knowing full well it would lead to increased emotional investment from her. This calculated manipulation served as a precursor to his eventual decision to eliminate his family, clearing the path for his new life with Nicole. Watts's dark triad of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism is a potent cocktail, brewed in the depths of his own psyche. It allowed him to navigate the complexities of human relationships with calculated precision, bending reality to serve his own twisted desires. As we continue to unravel the threads of this dark tapestry, it becomes increasingly clear that Chris Watts was never driven by emotions or empathy but rather by an insatiable need for self-preservation and control. In the depths of his own darkness, Watts found a sense of power and freedom, free from the constraints of morality and compassion. His actions were a manifestation of his inner world, a world devoid of human connection and empathy. As we gaze into the abyss of his psyche, it becomes impossible to look away, transfixed by the sheer malevolence that lurked beneath the surface of this calculating killer. As the days ticked by, Chris Watts' mind was consumed by the thrill of his newfound love affair. Nicole Kessinger, a young and vibrant woman, had captured his attention and he found himself lost in her charms. It was as if she had awakened a part of him that had been dormant for far too long. But what seemed like a whirlwind romance to outsiders was merely a cleverly crafted illusion, a calculated move to justify the destruction of everything that truly mattered. In his twisted logic, Chris Watts had already written off Shannon and the girls. He had mentally checked out of their lives, viewing them as an inconvenience to be removed rather than people with their own existence and rights. This internal narrative was crucial, for it allowed him to rationalize his behavior, to convince himself that he was simply following his true desires. As he spoke about wanting a fresh start, Chris Watts wasn't just referring to the thrill of a new romance, he was also articulating a deep-seated desire to shed the responsibilities that came with being a husband and father. His words were laced with an air of desperation, a cry for liberation from the suffocating grip of his family life. But this fresh start wasn't about finding happiness or fulfillment, it was about erasing the inconvenient aspects of his life. The girls' noise, Shannon's needs, and the very fabric of their relationships were all just obstacles to be eliminated. And so, Chris Watts began to distance himself from his family, creating an emotional firewall that would soon prove impenetrable. As he whispered sweet nothings into Nicole Kessinger's ear, Chris Watts was, in fact, rehearsing his own psychological defense mechanisms. He was preparing for the moment when he would be forced to confront the consequences of his actions, a moment when his carefully crafted illusion would begin to crumble. This is the narcissistic discard at its most insidious, the silent, calculated abandonment that precedes any outward action. It's not about sudden, impulsive decisions, it's about methodically erasing others from one's internal world, rendering them irrelevant and invisible. In Chris Watts' mind, Shannon and the girls were already gone, their existence reduced to mere background noise. He had mentally filed them away as problems to be solved, rather than people deserving of love, care, and respect. And so, he began to orchestrate a masterclass in emotional manipulation, slowly but surely severing all ties that bound him to his family. As the days turned into weeks, Chris Watts' language became increasingly laced with deceit. He spoke about finding himself, about being true to who he was, without ever acknowledging the devastating impact his words would have on those around him. He was, in effect, rewiring his own narrative, crafting a self-serving mythology that would justify the destruction of everything he claimed to hold dear. In this twisted dance, Chris Watts was both the puppeteer and the puppet, manipulating reality to fit his own sinister agenda. And yet, despite the calculated nature of his actions, there remains an unnerving sense of vulnerability, a hint that beneath the surface lies a deep-seated desperation, a cry for connection in a world where love is often reduced to a transactional affair. As we continue to unravel the tangled threads of Chris Watts' psyche, it becomes increasingly clear that this was never about finding true love, it was always about erasing the inconvenient aspects of his life. The girls' laughter, Shannon's tears, and the very fabric of their relationships were all just obstacles to be eliminated, erased from his internal world like so many unwanted memories. And yet, as we peer into the abyss of Chris Watts' darkness, there remains a haunting sense that we are not so different from him. That within each of us lies a similar capacity for emotional manipulation, for discarding those who once brought us joy in order to pursue our own twisted desires. As Chris Watts stood on his front lawn, a sea of reporters and cameras swarming around him, he delivered a scripted performance of grief that would be etched in the public's collective consciousness forever. The words spilled forth from his lips like a well-rehearsed mantra. "I just want my family back," he pleaded, his voice cracking with what appeared to be genuine anguish. But beneath the surface, forensic psychologists and body language analysts detected a flat effect, or emotional numbness that belied the sincerity of his words. The cameras captured every nuance, every fleeting expression that betrayed Chris Watts' true emotions. The slight upturn of his lips into an involuntary smile, the way his eyes seemed to glaze over as he spoke about his daughters in the past tense, even before it was appropriate to do so. It was a performance so convincing that many observers would later remark on the eerie normalcy of it all, as if Chris Watts were merely playing out a rehearsed script. But psychopaths and narcissists like Chris Watts are masters at mimicking emotion convincingly. They have an uncanny ability to tap into our collective emotional vulnerability, to manipulate our emotions and use them against us. And in this case, Chris Watts' performance of grief was no exception. He had honed his skills through years of practice, perfecting the art of feigning emotion when it served his purposes. As the days went by, detectives began to notice a pattern in Chris Watts' behavior during their interrogations. At first, he seemed genuinely distraught, his eyes welling up with tears as he spoke about his missing family. But as the questions probed deeper into his actions, Chris Watts' performance began to falter. His responses became more rehearsed, his words laced with a growing sense of desperation. It was then that the detectives noticed the first cracks in Chris Watts' facade. He grew increasingly agitated, his voice rising in pitch as he denied any involvement in his family's disappearance. And yet, even as he protested his innocence, his eyes betrayed him, flashing with a feral intensity that seemed to reveal the true nature of his psyche. The performance of grief, it seemed, was beginning to collapse under the pressure. Chris Watts' carefully crafted script was no match for the intense scrutiny of the detectives, and as they dug deeper into his actions, he began to reveal the cracks in his armor. His rehearsed words gave way to a growing sense of panic, and finally, the mask slipped away altogether. In that moment, the detectives saw something that would haunt them forever: the true face of Chris Watts, a psychopath driven by a monstrous desire for control and power. It was a glimpse into the abyss, a dark and foreboding world where emotion was a mere facade, and humanity was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. As the truth began to unravel, Chris Watts' performance of grief gave way to a stark, unvarnished reality, one that would forever tarnish his name and stain the memories of those he had brutally slaughtered. And in the end, it was not the tears or the anguish that defined him, but the cold, calculating calculation that drove him to commit such atrocities. As we delve deeper into the psyche of Chris Watts, it becomes increasingly apparent that his actions were not an anomaly, but rather a product of a uniquely vulnerable family structure. The Watts family, like many others, was entwined in a complex web of intimacy, trust, and financial dependence. This intricate tapestry created an environment ripe for exploitation by Chris's dark triad tendencies. The very people he was supposed to love and protect, his wife Shannon and their daughters Bella and Celeste, were the ones who unwittingly enabled his destructive behavior. The intimacy they shared as a family unit allowed Chris to insinuate himself into their lives, making it difficult for anyone outside of that circle to notice the subtle changes in his behavior. In the months leading up to Shannon's tragic death, she had begun to sense something was amiss. She confided in friends about feeling disconnected from Chris, as if they were living parallel lives. At the time, these concerns seemed irrational, even paranoid. However, in hindsight, Shannon's intuition proved eerily prescient. As a narcissist, Chris Watts was adept at manipulating those around him to achieve his goals. He used his charm and charisma to create an illusion of intimacy and connection, only to secretly devalue and isolate those he deemed insignificant or burdensome. This toxic dynamic was exacerbated by the financial entanglement that bound the family together. The isolation Shannon and her daughters experienced as a result of Chris's controlling behavior further solidified their dependence on him. As the primary breadwinner, Chris held the purse strings, making it difficult for them to leave or seek outside help. This isolation also enabled Chris to control the narrative, manipulating those around him to believe he was the victim, rather than the perpetrator. The moment when a narcissist decides a relationship is over but has not yet left is often referred to as the danger zone. It's during this period that they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals, including manipulation, coercion, and even violence. Chris Watts had clearly entered this zone, and Shannon was unwittingly caught in the crossfire. As we analyze the events leading up to Shannon's death, it becomes clear that Chris's actions were not a sudden aberration, but rather the culmination of a calculated plan. He used his charisma and charm to manipulate those around him, slowly eroding the trust and intimacy that once bound them together. The family structure, once a source of strength and security, had been quietly transformed into a ticking time bomb. In the darkness of Chris Watts's psyche, we find a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the warning signs of emotional withdrawal and devaluation. Shannon's intuition may have been dismissed as irrational at the time, but it ultimately proved to be a desperate cry for help. The tragedy that unfolded serves as a stark reminder that even in the most seemingly ordinary families, the darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. As we continue to unravel the threads of Chris Watts' psyche, it becomes increasingly clear that his actions were not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a larger societal problem. The family unit, once a bastion of safety and security, has become a uniquely vulnerable environment for dark psychology exploitation. The intimacy, trust, and financial entanglement that bind families together can also create the perfect storm for manipulation and control. In the face of such tragedy, we are left with more questions than answers. What signs should we be looking out for in our own relationships? How can we recognize the subtle changes in behavior that may indicate a loved one is succumbing to the dangers of dark psychology? And what can we do to prevent the devastating consequences that unfolded in the Watts family? As we venture deeper into the darkness, it becomes clear that the answers to these questions lie not in the perpetrator's psyche alone, but in our collective willingness to confront the harsh realities of human nature. The tragedy of Chris Watts serves as a stark reminder that even in the most seemingly ordinary families, the line between love and destruction can be perilously thin. The confession of Chris Watts. The moment when the mask slipped, revealing the calculating cruelty beneath. The surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera, capturing the calculated deliberation in his eyes as he betrayed his own family. At first, he tried to shift the blame onto Shannon, painting her as some kind of monster who had brutally murdered their daughters. But investigators were not fooled. They knew that Chris Watts was the mastermind behind this horrific crime, and they would stop at nothing to bring him to justice. And so, on August 15, 2018, Chris Watts finally cracked under the weight of his own guilt. He confessed to the murders of Shannon, Bella, and Celeste, his daughters. The news was met with shock and outrage, as the nation struggled to comprehend the depths of depravity that had been revealed. In the end, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. His punishment, 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. It is a fitting sentence for a man who showed no regard for human life, not even his own family's. But as we reflect on this case, let us not forget that Chris Watts was once a seemingly ordinary person. He posted family photos on social media, smiled at his neighbors, and built a life that seemed picture perfect. And yet, beneath the surface, he was a ticking time bomb of violence and manipulation. This is the danger of the dark triad. It does not announce itself with flashing warning signs or loud proclamations. It wears the face of normalcy, blending in seamlessly with the crowd. It hides behind a mask of charm and charisma, making it almost impossible to detect until it's too late. And that is the permanent lesson this case teaches us: awareness is the only protection against the dark triad. Know the patterns of manipulation and control. Trust your instincts when you notice something is off. Shannon noticed. She told friends that something was wrong with Chris Watts, but she was dismissed as overreacting or paranoid. In reality, she was right. And if we had listened to her warnings, perhaps this tragedy could have been averted. But instead, we are left to confront the horrors of what happened in Frederick, Colorado. Chris Watts' case is a stark reminder that evil can wear many faces, and that even the most seemingly ordinary person can harbor a dark secret. So let us remember Shannon's warning signs: the distance in someone's eyes, the manipulation, the control. Let us be aware of our surroundings, of those around us, and of the subtle signs that something is not quite right. And when we notice those signs, let us trust our instincts and take action to protect ourselves and those we love. For Shannon, Bella, and Celeste, may their memory serve as a beacon of hope in the darkness, reminding us that awareness is the only protection against the evil that lurks among us.